Nobody had screamed inside the Hall of Elders in over 6,000 years, but tonight, three delegates were screaming at once. The hall sat deep inside the core of Polaris Ring, a station so old that its original builders had gone extinct 2 civilizations ago. The walls were carved from compressed starlight, a material only the ancients knew how to forge, and they glowed faintly blue no matter what time of day it was. The circular chamber held seats for 15 species, tiered in rings that rose from a central stage to a vaulted ceiling etched with the names of every treaty ever signed within its walls. Tonight, those names meant nothing. Tonight, the chamber was falling apart. A Fenroot diplomat, 8 feet tall, body layered in translucent mineral plates, was slamming his fist against the railing of his tier. Each impact sent a crack running through his own hand. He did not notice. Behind him, 2 Ohari officials were shouting over each other in a language that sounded like water being poured over hot metal. Across the room, a cluster of insectoid delegates from the Brevi Collective had locked their limbs together in a defensive formation, a reflexive behavior that their species had not displayed in public for centuries. Kuti, the center of the stage, Ambassador Kessin of the Ohari Dominion, was trying to restore order. He was failing. The data is confirmed, he said for the 4th time, his 4 arms raised in a gesture meant to command silence. The gravitational body will intersect 3 inhabited systems within the next rotation cycle. We have confirmed trajectory, confirmed mass, confirmed speed. This is not a projection. This is happening. The screaming got louder. Kessin had spent his entire career in diplomacy. He had negotiated border disputes between species that had been at war for 1,000 years. He had brokered trade agreements so complex that they required 17 translators working simultaneously. But he had never seen the conclave like this. The elder species, the oldest, most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy, were panicking like hatchlings caught in a storm, because this was the thing they had always feared. The one event their entire civilization had been built to prevent. An extinction-level threat, real and approaching, and none of them had the faintest idea what to do about it. Every species in the conclave had been raised on the doctrine of prevention. For millennia, they had poured resources into detection arrays, early warning systems, gravitational shields, and deep space monitoring. Their entire philosophy was built on one principle: see the threat early enough, and you can stop it. No catastrophe had ever reached them. No extinction event had ever touched their worlds. Their systems worked. Until now, the gravitational body had appeared from a region of space that their sensors did not cover. It moved in ways their physics could not fully explain. And it was too large, too fast, and too close to be deflected or destroyed by any technology they possessed. For the first time in galactic history, the elder species were facing something they could not prevent, and they had no idea how to survive it. That was when the doors opened and a human walked in. She was unremarkable by galactic standards. Short, no natural armor, no bioluminescence, no telepathy. She wore a simple gray uniform with a blue circle on the shoulder, Earth's emblem, so small that most species needed magnification to see it. Her name was Lena Mikkonen, and she had been humanity's provisional envoy to the conclave for exactly 19 days. She had not been invited to this session. Humanity was still classified as an emerging species, too young, too small, too fragile to matter. They had no voting rights, no formal seat, and no voice in conclave proceedings. But the guards had abandoned their posts in the panic, and Lena had walked through the open doors because that was what she did when she heard screaming. She stood at the back of the chamber and watched. She watched the Fenru diplomat crack his own hand. She watched the Ohari officials shout themselves hoarse. She watched the Brevi lock together in silent terror. She watched Kessin fail to hold the room. After 15 minutes, she had seen enough. She walked down the steps to the central stage. No one stopped her. Most of them did not even notice her until she was already standing beside Kessin, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression calm in a way that felt almost alien in the chaos. Kessin turned to her. "You're not authorized to be here." "I know," Lena said, "but I have a question, and I think it might help." Kessin stared at her. The chamber was still roaring around them. "Ask," he said, because at this point, Nothing could make things worse. Lena looked out at the assembled delegates. She raised her voice just enough to cut through the noise. What type of extinction event is this? The translators carried her words to every seat. One by one, the delegates fell silent. Not because the question was reassuring, but because none of them understood it. The Fenru diplomat lowered his cracked hand. Type. Yes, Lena said. Is it geological? Atmospheric? Radiological? Biological? Impact-based? Gravitational? Is it fast onset or slow burn? What is the projected survival window? No one answered. 15 species, 6,000 years of shared governance, and not a single one of them had a classification system for extinction events. Lena understood. She felt it settle into her chest like a cold weight. They had never needed categories because they had never survived one. Humanity had survived 5. Ambassador, she said quietly, I think we need to talk. Every light in the hall dimmed except the one above the central stage, and for the first time in living memory, every delegate in the conclave was silent at the same moment. Lena stood in that single column of light with nothing in her hands. No datapath, no holographic display, no charts or graphs or projected timelines. She had asked for nothing because she needed nothing. What she was about to say was not information she had studied. It was information her species had been carved from. Kessin had given her the floor with visible reluctance. The other delegates had not objected, not because they wanted to hear a human speak, but because they had exhausted themselves with screaming and had nothing left to offer. Lena was a distraction, and distractions were welcome. She began without introduction. 74,000 years ago, a mountain on our world exploded. Not a small eruption, the kind that blots out the sun. Ash covered the sky for years. Temperatures collapsed. The plants that our ancestors depended on for food died across entire continents. Animal herds that had sustained human populations for generations vanished. She paused. Our species was reduced to fewer than 10,000 breeding individuals. Some estimates say fewer than 2,000. On a world with no faster-than-light travel, no orbital infrastructure, no outside contact of any kind. Just stone tools, fire, and whatever stubborn refusal to die was already wired into our genetics. The Brevi delegate uncurled one of its limbs. Its translator clicked softly. You survived a volcanic extinction with stone tools. We did not just survive it, Lena said. We expanded after it. Within a few thousand years, we had spread across the planet. She moved on before they could fully absorb that. The second time we nearly died, it was ice. Our world goes through cycles where temperatures drop and massive glaciers advance across the land. Our ancestors lived through an ice age that lasted roughly 100,000 years. They migrated across frozen landscapes, crossed mountain ranges and land bridges, carried their children and their wounded, and settled new territories they had never seen before. They did this on foot, with no maps. The Jurassic delegate, a heavy-bodied reptilian wrapped in ceremonial plate, shifted uncomfortably. His species was cold-sensitive. The concept of surviving an ice age was physically horrifying to him. Lena continued. The third extinction was disease. A bacterial plague swept across our largest landmass roughly 700 years ago. It killed between 30 and 60% of the population in affected regions. Entire cities emptied. Political and religious systems collapsed. The medical knowledge of the time was so primitive that people did not even understand the plague was caused by a living organism. They thought it was a punishment from their gods. She let that sit. The translators hummed. The fourth was war. Twice in a single generation, our species fought global conflicts using industrial weapons, machines designed to kill as efficiently as possible. The second of these wars ended when one nation built a device that split the atom and used it to destroy 2 cities. The explosions were hotter than the surface of our star. After that, multiple nations built the same weapon. For 50 years, humanity lived with the knowledge that a handful of leaders could end all life on our planet in under an hour. Kessin's 4 arms had gone rigid at his sides. You created a weapon capable of destroying your own world. We created thousands of them. And you did not use them. We used too. Then we were afraid enough to stop. We did not destroy the weapons. We just agreed not to fire them. That agreement held. Barely. The chamber was utterly still. The fifth extinction was the slowest, Lena said, and her voice dropped slightly. This one was still recent enough to carry weight. Our industrial progress, the same progress that gave us medicine, telecommunications, flight, and eventually space travel, also changed our atmosphere. Global temperatures rose. Ice caps melted. Sea levels climbed. Coastlines vanished. Farmland turned to dust. Storms became violent enough to level cities. Species that had survived for millions of years went extinct in decades. She looked at the delegates. This one was the cruelest because we caused it ourselves, and because it moved so slowly that half our population denied it was happening until the water was at their doors. The Fenru diplomat leaned forward. His cracked hand rested on the railing. Surely for this one, you built great refuges. Underground shelters. Orbital colonies. Lena shook her head. No, not at first. For decades, we argued. We blamed each other. We prioritized short-term comfort over long-term survival. And then, when the damage became impossible to ignore, we did what we always do. We grieved. We adapted. We rebuilt. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but enough. She stepped back from the center of the stage and looked up at the tiered seats rising above her. 15 species, thousands of years of civilization, and not one of them had a scar. You asked me what type of extinction event is approaching, she said. I asked because on Earth, we have categories. We sort our apocalypses the way you sort your treaties, by type, by severity, by survival window. We do this because we have had to, not once, 5 times. She took a breath. Every species in this chamber has spent millennia afraid of extinction. You have built your entire civilization around preventing it. But you have never lived through one. You have never buried half your population and gotten up the next morning to plant crops in poisoned soil. She looked directly at the Fenru diplomat. You asked what type of event this is. I can help you answer that. But first, you need to understand something about my species. She held his gaze. We do not fear extinction. We remember it. And that is not the same thing. The hall stayed silent for a very long time. By the time Lena reached her quarters that night, the recording of her address had already been transmitted to 370 worlds. She did not find out from an official channel. She found out because her door would not open. The access panel, which had recognized her biometrics without issue for 19 days, now flashed a yellow warning. A security hold placed by station administration. She stood in the corridor for 6 minutes before an Ohari maintenance worker arrived to override the lock manually. He would not look at her while he worked. That was the first sign. The second came the next morning when she walked to the diplomatic commons for breakfast and found it rearranged. The tables near the human section had been moved. Not removed, moved. Pushed further apart, creating a buffer of empty floor between the seats where Lena and her small staff usually ate and the nearest cluster of alien delegates. The Ohari who managed the commons said it was a ventilation issue. The ventilation had been fine yesterday. The third sign was the intelligence briefing from Earth, which arrived encrypted and flagged urgent. Lena opened it in her quarters with the door sealed. The summary was blunt. Across the galaxy, humanity's classification was changing, and not in a good direction. The Fenru Academic Council had published a formal assessment within hours of her speech. Their conclusion was that any species capable of enduring 5 extinction-level events without external intervention must possess psychological characteristics incompatible with stable galactic coexistence. The paper used the phrase abnormal persistence threshold, a clinical way of saying that humans were too stubborn to die, and that made them dangerous. The Jurassic hegemony had gone further. Their military intelligence bureau had reclassified humanity from developing contact species to uncontained survival anomaly. Lena had to read the designation twice to make sure she understood it correctly. It was a classification normally reserved for self-replicating weapons systems and rogue artificial intelligences. It meant that every Jurassic warship in the galaxy was now authorized to track, monitor, and report the movements of any human vessel in real time. Point four smaller species from the outer territories had recalled their ambassadors from Polaris Ring without explanation. A fifth had suspended all trade negotiations with Earth-allied stations. And on the galactic communication networks, the vast, sprawling web of signals that connected civilizations across thousands of light years, humanity was the only topic anyone was talking about. Not with admiration. With fear. Lena sat with the briefing open on her lap and stared at the wall of her quarters. She had expected discomfort. She had expected awkward questions and nervous glances and perhaps a few formal objections to her unauthorized address. She had not expected to become the reason the galaxy was afraid. She drafted a message to Earth. My address to the conclave has been received as a threat disclosure rather than a survival record. Multiple species are withdrawing from contact. The Jurassic have reclassified us alongside weapons systems. I recommend a careful, measured response. We should not escalate. Earth replied in 3 hours. Noted. Hold position. Do not withdraw. Do not apologize. Lena closed the message and exhaled slowly. A knock came at her door that evening. She opened it to find a young Ohari standing in the corridor. He was smaller than most of his species, with pale skin and nervous eyes that darted left and right before settling on her face. 2 of his 4 arms were tucked tight against his torso, a posture Lena had learned meant either submission or anxiety. My name is Norith, he said. I work in the Conclave's archive division. I study historical records. May I come in? Lena let him in. Norith perched on the edge of a chair like a bird ready to fly at the first loud noise. I have been reviewing your address, he said, not as a threat analyst, as a historian, and I believe I understand something that the rest of the Conclave does not. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Our civilization was founded on a single fear, the fear of extinction. Every alliance, every treaty, every shared resource agreement in Conclave history exists because we all agreed that the worst thing that could happen was the end of a species. Our entire structure is built on avoiding that outcome. He looked at her. You told us it already happened to your people. 5 times. And you survived. That does not just challenge our readiness. It challenges our identity. Everything we are, everything the Conclave is built on the assumption that extinction is the thing that has not happened yet. You proved that assumption wrong. Lena nodded slowly. So, instead of learning from us, they made us the threat. Yes. North's voice was barely above a whisper. It is easier to be afraid of you than to admit that our entire civilization is built on a fear we never actually faced. We feared the dark. You lived in it. He stood. I came to tell you that not everyone agrees with the reclassification. Some of us see your history as something valuable. A lesson, not a weapon. But those of us who think this way are very quiet right now. He left without another word. Lena stood alone in her quarters. Through the viewport, the stars burned steadily, and somewhere among them, the gravitational anomaly was still moving toward Fenrir's space. She thought about Earth. She thought about every ancestor who had clawed through ash and ice and plague and fire to hand the next generation a world that was broken but still breathing. They had survived 5 extinctions, and the galaxy's first reaction was to be afraid of the survivors. Lena closed her eyes. Then she opened them, sat down, and started planning. Because the anomaly was coming whether the galaxy trusted her or not. And humans did not wait for permission to help. They never had. The distress beacon from the Fenrir colony world of Virith started transmitting at noon and did not stop for 72 hours. Virith was a world of pale blue forests and shallow crystal seas, home to just under 2 million Fenrir who lived in lattice cities grown directly from the planet's mineral crust. It was a quiet place, a stable place. In 4 centuries of habitation, the worst natural event on record had been a minor tremor that cracked a few windows in the southern district. The emergency protocols stored in Virith's central archive were 400 years old, never tested, and written in a format so outdated that most modern systems could not even open the files. The anomaly arrived 3 days ahead of every projection. Its gravitational pull reached Virith's system like an invisible tide. Within hours, the planet's crust, stable for millennia, began to fracture. Fault lines opened where none had existed. The shallow crystal seas surged inland, flooding the lower districts of every lattice city on the northern continent. Crystal forests that had stood for centuries shattered like dropped glass, sending razor-sharp fragments across the landscape on Polaris Ring. The Conclave received the distress signal and immediately called an emergency session. The session lasted 11 hours. In that time, for procedural motions were filed. A subcommittee was formed to determine whether the crisis met the threshold for a Category Alpha response or a Category Beta response, two designations that required different chains of approval and different resource allocations. A second subcommittee was formed to review the legal authority of the first subcommittee. A third was proposed and then tabled for future discussion. While the conclave debated process, Virith's northern power grid failed completely, leaving 800,000 Fenru in darkness. Lena watched the session from the gallery. She sat in the upper tier where observers without voting rights were permitted, the section that was usually empty and today held exactly one person. Her. She watched the delegates argue about terminology while a world cracked apart. She watched Kessin try to hold the chamber together with procedural language that no one was listening to. She watched a Fenru representative plead for immediate aid and be told that the request needed to be submitted through proper channels. At the 8-hour mark, Lena left the gallery. She walked to her quarters, sealed the door, and opened a direct channel to Earth. Virith is in active crisis, she said. The anomaly has hit ahead of schedule. The conclave is locked in procedural debate. They have response plans, but no ability to execute them. I am requesting authorization to offer direct assistance. Earth's response came in 40 minutes. It was the shortest official communication Lena had ever received. Approved. Go. Lena allowed herself exactly 5 seconds to feel the weight of what she was about to do. Then she started calling every human she could reach. Humanity's presence in this region of the galaxy was small. No military fleet. No forward bases. No orbital platforms. What they had was a scattered network of civilians, engineers, doctors, logistics specialists, environmental scientists, people who had ended up in deep space not because they were warriors, but because they were the type of humans who could not sit still when there was a problem to solve. Within 14 hours, Lena had assembled a team of 38 on a borrowed Ohari cargo transport. They carried field medical kits, portable generators, water purification units, structural bracing equipment, thermal shelters, and enough emergency food for 2,000 people for 20 days and no weapons. No armor. No warships. That a logistics coordinator named Rico Lotti looked at the cargo manifest and said, "We are flying a borrowed ship into a gravitational anomaly to save a species that has classified us as a threat, and our heaviest piece of equipment is a water filter." Lena nodded. Welcome to human disaster response. The transport jumped to faster than light and arrived at Virith's orbit to find 3 Fenru evacuation vessels circling the planet. All 3 were fueled, loaded with supplies, and completely stationary. Lena hailed the lead ship. "This is Lena Mikkonen, human envoy. Your ships appear ready for descent. Why have you not launched?" The Fenru captain's voice was stiff with barely controlled panic. Evacuation protocol requires formal authorization from a conclave. The crisis designation has not been issued. We cannot descend without it. Lena closed her eyes for 3 seconds. She breathed in. She breathed out. "Captain, are there people on the surface who need help? Thousands. Are your ships capable of reaching them?" "Yes." "Then go. Now, I will take responsibility for the authorization." A long silence. "You do not have the authority to override conclave protocol." "No, I do not. But I have 38 people on this transport who are going to the surface in the next 20 minutes regardless. If your colonists see humans pulling people out of rubble while your evacuation fleet sits in orbit waiting for permission code, you'll have a much bigger problem than a missing signature." The silence stretched. Then the Fenru captain said, very quietly, "We are beginning descent." Lena turned to her team. They were already on their feet, checking gear, tightening straps, running through checklists with the calm, mechanical efficiency of people who had done this kind of work before. Not in space, but in earthquake zones, flood corridors, and wildfire perimeters back on Earth. We are not soldiers, Lena said. We are not here to fight or prove anything. We are here because people are dying and nobody else is moving. Stay in pairs. Communicate constantly. If the ground shifts, go low and find structure. If you see someone hurt, stop and help them. She looked at their faces. Tired, determined, afraid. Let's go to work. The transport punched through the atmosphere, and the shattered blue forests of Virith rose up beneath them like a broken mirror. A crack opened in the ground 17 steps ahead of Lena, and a jet of superheated mineral vapor shot into the sky with a sound like tearing metal. She did not flinch. She changed direction, waved her team left, and kept moving. They had been on the surface of Virith for less than 10 minutes, and already the world was trying to kill them. The crystal forests that had once risen in elegant spires from the mineral-rich soil were now fields of shattered debris, jagged, translucent shards that cut through standard boots and reflected light in blinding patterns. The lattice city of Seral, the largest settlement on the northern continent, was broken. Streets that had once been smooth and luminous were split and buckled. Water from the inland surge sat in every depression, gray with sediment and chemical runoff. And everywhere, in doorways on collapsed platforms, wandering through the wreckage with slow, directionless steps, there were Fenru. They were not running. They were not screaming. They were standing still, their crystalline bodies dimmed with shock, their wide, translucent eyes staring at a world they no longer recognized. Most of them had never experienced anything worse than a power outage. They had no framework for this, no muscle memory, no instinct honed by generations of disaster. Lena split her team into 4 units: medical, shelter, power, search, and rescue. The medical unit set up inside a half-collapsed public building on the settlement's central avenue. A surgeon named Ren Palazur cleared a flat surface from the rubble, spread a thermal sheet over it, and began triage on the first wave of injured Fenru. Their biology was crystalline, layered mineral plates over a fluid inner core. Traumatic fractures were not just painful, but potentially fatal, because a deep enough crack could drain the core fluid and the creature would die from the inside out. Ren had spent 3 hours on the transport flight reading every available file on Fenru physiology. It was not enough. She improvised. She used epoxy resin meant for sealing structural cracks to bond shattered limb plates back together. She used thermal tape designed for insulating power cables to hold fractures in place. A Fenru elder watched her seal a child's broken arm with materials meant for a machine and said, "This is not how healing is done." Ren looked at him, her hands still sticky with resin. "No, but the child is not bleeding anymore." The elder said, "Nothing more." The shelter unit worked with whatever they could find. The crystal slabs that the Fenru used for construction were far too heavy for humans to lift, so the team's engineers, led by a structural specialist named Annika Brask, cut them into smaller sections using portable plasma tools. They built crude lean-tos and windbreaks from the fragments. They stretched thermal blankets over open gaps. They dug drainage trenches by hand to redirect floodwater away from clusters of survivors. The shelters were ugly, graceless. A child could have designed better-looking structures. But they blocked the wind and held the warmth, and that night, 600 Fenru slept under cover because of them. The power unit went underground. Viritha's lattice cities had extensive subterranean levels, living quarters, storage, medical bays, and when the power grid failed, over 1,000 Fenru had been trapped below ground in total darkness. A power systems engineer named Davi Reese crawled into a flooded maintenance shaft that was running with electrical discharge, worked for 90 minutes in water up to his chest, and rerouted 3 junction nodes by hand. When he climbed out, his hands were blistered and his suit was soaked through with mineral-contaminated water. A Fenru technician who had been watching from the shaft entrance asked him why he had gone in. Davi held up his ruined hands and said, "Because the lights were off and people were scared." The search and rescue unit faced the worst of it. Aftershocks rolled through the settlement every 15 to 20 minutes, each one collapsing structures that had been barely standing. A 2-person team, A woman named Sana Vike and a man named Joseph Collar located a group of 9 Fenru children trapped inside a collapsed learning hall on the settlement's eastern edge. The building was unstable. The crystal walls had fractured in an interlocking pattern that meant any significant vibration would bring the entire structure down. Joseph braced the entrance with a portable hydraulic jack. Sana crawled inside through a gap barely wide enough for a human torso. She moved on her stomach through rubble and dust, following the faint glow of Fenru bodies in the darkness. She found them huddled together in a back room. Small, terrified. Their crystal plates were dim, a sign of extreme stress in young Fenru. She guided them out one by one, passing each child back through the gap to Joseph. The 7th child was too frightened to move. Sana lay down in the rubble beside her, took the child's hand, and began humming a melody her mother used to sing to her during thunderstorms back on Earth. After 2 minutes, the child stood up. They crawled out together. The building collapsed 40 seconds later. North arrived on the last evacuation transport. He had not been assigned to the surface. He had volunteered, telling his superiors he needed to document the crisis for the historical archive. The truth was that he needed to see the humans with his own eyes. What he saw was not what he expected. He expected efficiency, discipline, perhaps some advanced technique or hidden technology that explained how such a small, fragile species could accomplish what they were accomplishing. Instead, he saw chaos. Beautiful, messy, stubborn chaos. He saw Rin sealing a fracture on a Fenru patient while blood from a cut on her own forearm dripped onto the table. He saw Annika holding a structural brace in place with her bare hands, trembling, cursing under her breath, while a family of 5 ran past her to safety. He saw Davi sitting in a pool of toxic water, eyes half closed from exhaustion, hands shaking, rewiring a junction box because there were still people below ground who needed light. And he saw Sana carrying a Fenru child on her back through a flooded street, singing to the child in a language the child could not understand, while the ground shook beneath her feet. He recorded everything. And in his personal notes, the ones he would later read aloud to the full conclave, he wrote a single sentence. They're not brave. They are terrified. They simply do not believe that fear is a reason to stop. By the end of the first day, 38 humans had stabilized 4 settlement zones, restored power to underground shelters, treated over 300 injuries, and pulled 41 survivors from collapsed structures. They lost 2 of their own. A logistics officer named Hazelmund was crushed when a crystal wall gave way during an aftershock. A medic named Nils Falk drowned in a flooded street while carrying a Fenru elder to higher ground. Nobody stopped working. 2 flat stones sat side by side on a piece of cracked crystal at the edge of what had been Cyril's main square. Lena had found them near the landing zone. They were not special, gray, smooth, the kind of small rocks that could have come from any world in the galaxy. She had placed them carefully, side by side, and now she stood in front of them while the pale morning light of Virith filtered through a sky still hazy with dust. Her team stood behind her. 38 had come down. 36 stood now. Nobody spoke. Lena said the names. Hazelmund, Nils Falk. She said what they had been doing when they died. She said that Hazel had been holding a position so a family could pass through, and that Nils had been carrying someone he had never met through water he knew was dangerous. Then she stood in silence for 60 seconds, and her team stood with her. Some of them cried. They did it without sound, the way humans often did when they were grieving in front of strangers. The Fenru watched from a distance. They did not understand the stones, or the silence, or the tears that fell without noise. But something in the ritual reached them anyway. Something older than language, older than species, something that lived in the simple act of stopping to honor the dead before going back to work, that a Fenru elder who had been pulled from a collapsed building the day before walked slowly to the edge of the human gathering. She lowered her crystalline head and stood still. She did not know the words. She did not need them. The anomaly passed beyond Virith's system 4 days later. The gravitational distortions faded. The tremors stopped. The seas, which had been churning and surging for days, slowly settled back towards something approaching normal. Virith was not the world it had been. Entire sections of the northern continent were permanently scarred. crystal forests reduced to gravel plains, coastlines redrawn, underground networks flooded beyond salvage. But the colony lived. Nearly 2 million Fenru breathed because the evacuation ships had finally launched, because the shelters had held through the worst nights, and because 38 humans had done the ugly, exhausting, thankless work of keeping strangers alive. The conclave reconvened on Polaris Ring 9 days after the anomaly passed. The Hall of Elders was full. Every species was represented. But the atmosphere was nothing like the screaming chaos of the first session. It was heavy, subdued, the kind of quiet that follows when something fundamental has shifted and no one is sure what comes next. Kessin called the session to order. He looked different, slower, more careful. "We are here to discuss the events at Virith and to determine the future of galactic crisis response," he said. "But before we proceed with formal analysis, we will hear testimony from Archivist Norith of the Historical Division, who was present on the surface during the crisis." Norith walked to the center of the platform. He was carrying a small recording device, but he did not activate it immediately. He stood in the light and looked at the delegates gathered above him, and for several seconds he said nothing at all. Then he began. "I went to Virith to observe the humans. I expected to find an explanation. Some hidden advantage, superior technology, advanced biology, genetic modification, something that would explain how a species so young and so physically unremarkable could survive what they have survived. I wanted data, a reason, something I could file and categorize and understand." He paused. "I did not find any of that. What I found was a surgeon sealing a child's broken arm with machine glue while her own blood dripped on the table. An engineer crawling into a flooded shaft because people were trapped in the dark. A woman lying in rubble, singing to a child who could not understand a single word because the sound of a voice was enough to make the child brave enough to move." He set the recording device down. "I have hours of documentation, but you do not need to see it to understand what I am about to tell you." He straightened and looked directly at the Jurassic delegation. "You classified humanity as an uncontained survival anomaly, a threat designation reserved for weapons and rogue intelligences. I am asking you to withdraw that classification, not because the humans are harmless, they are not, but because they're the only species in this conclave that has ever been tested. We have spent millennia preparing for catastrophe. They have spent millennia living through it. And when our catastrophe finally arrived, we froze. They did not." The hall was silent. The oldest Jurassic delegate, a massive figure with scarred scales and clouded eyes, so ancient that his ceremonial armor had been repaired more times than anyone could count, rose slowly from his seat. He looked at Lena, who sat in the upper gallery where she had watched every session, still without a vote, still without a seat on the floor. "Human," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stone grinding against stone. "I have one question." Lena leaned forward. "Ask, how do you prepare your children for the end of everything?" Lena was quiet for a moment. She thought about her mother, who had grown up in a coastal city that was now underwater. She thought about her grandfather, who had worked in atmospheric recovery for 40 years and never once complained about the work. She thought about the story she had been told as a child. Not fantasies, but true stories. Stories about ice and ash and plague and mushroom clouds and the slow drowning of shorelines that had stood for 10,000 years. "We do not prepare them for the end," Lena said. "We prepare them for the morning after." The Jurassic elder stared at her. Then very slowly he sat down. Kessin spoke into the stillness. "The conclave has existed for over 6,000 years. In all that time, we have prepared for the worst and prayed it would never come. When it came, we were not ready. The humans were." He paused. "I believe we have something to learn." It was not a grand moment of unity. There was no sudden embrace, no sweeping declaration of alliance, no dramatic reversal of centuries of galactic politics. The fear of humanity did not evaporate, but something cracked in the old foundation. A fissure, small, quiet, but real, through which a different kind of understanding began to seep. After the session, Lena walked alone to the observation deck on the outer ring of Polaris Ring. The stars stretched before her, ancient, cold, and endless. Somewhere out there, The sixth doom was already taking shape. She did not know what form it would take. Nobody ever did. She pressed her palm against the glass and felt the void on the other side. She was tired. She was grieving. She was one small, soft creature standing at the edge of an enormous dark. But she was not afraid, because she came from a species that had stood at the edge of the dark 5 times before. And every time, every single time, they had found a way to build a fire. And the morning after was coming, tea always did.